History Zone, where the past comes alive.
I remember the day it all began, as if it were etched into the walls of my mind, a warning no one heeded. I was just a young officer in the American colonial forces, stationed in a small outpost in what they called the Western Territories, a land full of promise, ambition, and danger. We believed ourselves untouchable, an unstoppable machine moving across the continent, planting flags and stamping authority into every corner we could reach. We were blinded by the brilliance of our empire, thinking ourselves invincible, and yet I knew even then that our strength was fragile, built on pride and arrogance. It started with a map, an unassuming piece of parchment delivered by a local trader. He claimed it showed the location of a vital supply route, one that would allow our forces to cut through the heart of a region rich with resources and influence. Our general scoffed at him at first. Maps from local traders were often wrong, sometimes traps. But the temptation of wealth and power is an intoxicating drug, and one of our commanders, a man whose ambition outweighed his wisdom, insisted on acting immediately. I remember standing in the candlelit war room, hearing the clatter of horses outside, smelling the smoke from the fires where the men sharpened their swords and polished their muskets. The room hummed with anticipation. I, however, felt a deep unease gnawing at my gut. Something about the map felt off. Perhaps it was the way the trader avoided eye contact, or the subtle hesitation in his voice, but my instincts screamed caution. I voiced my concerns, trying to warn the commanders that acting without verification could cost us dearly. "You doubt the intelligence of your own empire, soldier?" one of them barked at me. I felt my face flush, but I held my ground. "Sir," I said, "there are signs this could be a trap. We should scout the area, verify the details. Rushing forward, it could be catastrophic."
The commander laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Catastrophic or cautious cowardice? Our empire does not wait for caution. It conquers, it claims, we act, we win. Those who hesitate are forgotten." And just like that, my words were dismissed. My warnings were swept away with the arrogance of men who had never faced true danger beyond the edge of their maps. I should have known that day that pride often precedes ruin. We mobilized the troops, a procession of hundreds, marching under the banners of our empire, each step echoing our supposed supremacy. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that only comes before disaster. I remember looking at the faces of the soldiers, young men far from home, believing they were heroes of history. They trusted their commanders. They trusted me. I trusted them. By the time we reached the designated location, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the open plains. The night was eerily silent, as if the land itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. And then we saw it, a force hidden, prepared, and far more numerous than we had imagined. I had been right. The map was a trap, but it was too late. Our empire's soldiers were caught in a deadly web of ambushes, miscalculations, and underestimations. I watched, helpless, as men I had trained with, fought beside, and laughed with,
were cut down one by one. The thunder of muskets and the screams of the dying echoed through the night, an haunting symphony of our empire's folly. That night, I learned a truth I would carry to the grave. Empires do not fall from outside threats alone. They crumble because of the arrogance, haste, and mistakes of those who believe themselves untouchable. And in that moment, I realized that a single mistake, a single decision made in pride, could unravel everything we had built. The morning after the ambush, the world felt hollow. The fire of our camp had burned itself down to smoldering embers, and the smell of smoke and blood lingered like a curse over the land. I wandered among the survivors, counting faces, noting who had fallen and who remained. Every one of them carried the same haunted look I did, a mixture of grief, disbelief, and silent rage. Our pride had been shattered, not by a superior army, but by our own ignorance. We had walked willingly into a trap, and the consequences were devastating. Commanders we had trusted without question were dead or captured, their dreams of glory buried alongside their bodies. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing on me, heavy enough to crush my spirit. I had warned them. I had tried to prevent this. Yet here I was, powerless, forced to survive in the wreckage of an empire's overconfidence. Orders had to be given, even if none of us knew what was left to command. I gathered the remaining officers and tried to establish some semblance of structure, but chaos had already taken root. Soldiers drifted like ghosts through the camp, some muttering about vengeance, others about fleeing. I had never seen fear like this, not the quick panic that comes before a battle, but the deep, gnawing despair that eats away at the soul when everything you've built collapses before your eyes. It became painfully clear that the empire we had served was brittle. Its foundations, built on ambition and arrogance, had never accounted for the human element, our own fallibility. Every decision, every misstep had consequences that rippled outward, infecting everyone in its path. And this one mistake, the decision to trust the map without verification, was the first in a cascade that none of us could stop. We decided to retreat, but the land itself seemed to conspire against us. Roads we thought were safe were blocked or destroyed. Supply lines had vanished. We were being hunted by an enemy who knew every twist of the terrain better than we did. It was no longer a fight for conquest. It was a fight for survival. Every mile we covered seemed to grow longer, every night darker. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear became our constant companions.
At night, I would sit by what remained of the fire, listening to the wind howl through the trees, and imagining the empire crumbling back in the distant cities, far from this forsaken land. I pictured politicians in their offices, reading reports of our losses with a mixture of disbelief and denial, certain that some miracle would reverse our misfortune. They didn't understand that an empire's strength is only as solid as the decisions of those on the ground. One mistake, and it all unravels. But survival demanded action. I began scouting the area with a few trusted men, trying to find a route that would lead us to safety. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every rustle of leaves could signal an attack. I had to make choices that mattered, choices that would determine who lived and who died. And yet, every step I took reminded me of our arrogance. Every path I considered
haunted me with memories of the soldiers who had fallen because of it. In the stillness of one particular night, I found myself staring at the stars, thinking about what had led us here. I thought about ambition, about pride, about the belief that we were untouchable. And I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a battle lost. This was the beginning of the end. The empire we had believed eternal was now vulnerable, fragile, and exposed. And the worst part, I knew that history would not remember us as the men who had been betrayed by circumstance or luck. History would remember us for the mistake that cost us everything. One wrong choice, one moment of arrogance, and the entire empire had been brought to its knees. As I lay down to rest, surrounded by the quiet breathing of those who remained, I could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. The empire was dying, and there was nothing left to do but witness it. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning.
By the third week of our retreat, it was clear that the danger we faced was no longer just the enemy outside. It had seeped into our own ranks. The soldiers, once disciplined and loyal, had begun to fracture. Fear and exhaustion had opened cracks that ambition and resentment now widened. What had started as a disciplined march had turned into a desperate shuffle through hostile terrain, and with every step I felt the grip of our empire loosening. One evening, as the orange sun dipped behind the jagged hills, I discovered that some of our men had been siphoning supplies, hiding rations, and plotting their own escape. I confronted them, my voice raw from shouting over the wind and the murmurs of the restless camp. "Do you understand what this means?" I demanded, gripping the arm of a soldier I had once trained. "We are not just losing a battle, we are losing everything, and yet here you are, stealing from your brothers?" He looked at me with a mixture of defiance and fear. "Sir," he said, trembling, "we can't survive like this. If the empire doesn't care about us, why should we care about it?" And there it was, the bitter truth that I had feared. Loyalty is not guaranteed. It is earned, maintained, and sometimes forced to bend under pressure. In that moment, I realized that our empire had relied too heavily on blind obedience, and now the very people it depended on were questioning whether it was worth their lives. I tried to reassert control, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. Orders were ignored, alliances formed and dissolved in secret, and whispers of mutiny spread like wildfire through the camp. Even some of the younger officers began to doubt me, questioning whether we could reach safety at all. I could see the fear in their eyes, the way it twisted their faces and hardened their resolve, or, in some cases, destroyed it entirely. But it wasn't just disloyalty I feared. It was betrayal from the empire itself. Reports had begun trickling in from distant posts. Supply lines had been cut, reinforcements delayed, and the higher command seemed paralyzed by indecision. Our generals, the very men whose arrogance had led us here, were now blaming one another, pointing fingers instead of taking responsibility. I could almost hear the echo of that first night's warning in their words. One mistake, one bad decision, and the machinery of power falters. As we made camp in the ruins of an abandoned village, I discovered another betrayal, one that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Among the papers and maps left behind by fleeing officials,
I found evidence that someone in the higher command had deliberately sent us into the trap. The map we had trusted wasn't just misleading, it had been a tool of sabotage, a calculated plan to weaken the Empire by sacrificing a single unit in the Western territories. The thought made my stomach turn. Not only had our empire failed us through arrogance and miscalculation, but someone had ensured it, thriving on the consequences of our deaths. Who could do such a thing, and why? Was it ambition, revenge, or some darker, more insidious plan to see the empire fall from within? Sleep became impossible. I spent nights staring at the stars, feeling both powerless and infuriated. I replayed every decision, every word spoken in those early days, wondering if I could have stopped this if I had only been louder, firmer, more forceful. But it was too late. The poison of betrayal had already seeped into our ranks, and the empire that had seemed untouchable was now crumbling around us. Yet, amidst the chaos, I realized something else. Even as men plotted against one another, survival demanded unity. The enemy outside, the treachery within, and the Empire's own failures meant that our only hope was to cling to each other, however fragile that bond might be. And so I began to organize what remained of our forces, not as soldiers of a proud empire, but as men desperate to live through the consequences of one catastrophic mistake. I did not yet know if we would succeed, or if history would remember our survival as a footnote in the empire's fall. But I knew one thing: the moment of betrayal, the day loyalty fractured and the empire's shadow faded, had arrived. And from that day forward, nothing would ever be the same. The days blurred into one another as we pressed on, a weary and battered column of men moving through a land that seemed to grow more hostile with each step. The air was thick with dust, the kind that clings to your lungs and throat, and the nights were cold enough to make even the strongest soldier shiver uncontrollably. Hunger gnawed at us relentlessly. Each ration felt insufficient, each drop of water a treasure. I watched men I had known for years grow pale and thin, their hands trembling as they tried to keep their weapons steady. I had never understood the true terror of survival until that moment. Battles are one thing, strategic, purposeful, but this was different. This was the slow erosion of humanity, a relentless grind that broke spirits before it broke bodies. Men began whispering about desertion, about leaving the column and seeking refuge wherever they could. Some even looked at me, their supposed commander, with suspicion, as though I had somehow brought this misery upon them. And perhaps, in a way, I had. Every decision I made, every step I insisted we take to stay together, felt heavy with the knowledge that one wrong move could cost more lives. I slept less than an hour at a time, waking to every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch, expecting an attack, or worse, another betrayal from within. Each night I wondered how long we could survive before nature and men alike tore us apart. The enemy, too, had adapted. We could see their tracks, always just beyond the horizon, shadows that moved with terrifying precision. Occasionally, a distant shot would ring out, sending men scrambling for cover. Those who fell were sometimes eaten by wild animals before we could recover their bodies. We were constantly reminded that death was waiting around every corner, not as a possibility, but as a certainty. And yet, despite it all, some semblance of discipline persisted. I rallied the men as best I could, forcing them to conserve what little supplies remained, teaching them to move silently and encouraging them to trust in their instincts. But even as I tried to maintain order, I could feel the Empire's legacy slipping away. We were no longer soldiers of a proud and untouchable force. We were scavengers, survivors clinging to the bones of a world that had turned against us.
One night, as we camped in the ruins of a burned-out village, I discovered a hidden danger even closer to home. Among the men were whispers of mutiny. They had watched their comrades die, endured starvation and disease, and now their loyalty was stretched thin. I called a meeting, using the dim light of a half-broken lantern to illuminate my face, hoping to remind them of who we were, or at least who we had been. "Listen to me," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We are all that remains of an empire that believed itself eternal. But eternity is not given, it is earned. If we fracture now, if we turn on one another, we will all die, and history will remember nothing but our failure." For a moment, the men were silent, their eyes reflecting both fear and the faintest spark of hope. I could see that some of them still trusted me, that even in the shadow of our collapse, leadership still mattered. I clung to that trust, knowing it might be the only thing keeping us alive. The next day, we were ambushed again, smaller than the first, more tactical, but no less deadly. Men fell to the ground screaming, and I found myself fighting with a desperation I have never known, pulling soldiers from harm's way, dragging the wounded to relative safety. By the end of the day, our numbers were further reduced, our morale shredded. The empire we had served was a ghost, and its shadow seemed to mock us at every turn. That night, as I sat alone, sharpening my sword under the cold light of the moon, I realized that survival was no longer about victory or honor. It was about endurance. We were no longer part of an empire. We were part of a story of failure, a tale of one single mistake whose consequences would ripple across generations. And yet, deep in my chest, a stubborn ember of defiance refused to die. I would survive, even if I had to carry what remains of this broken army on my back, even if I had to walk through hell itself. I would survive, and I would witness the empire's fall, every brick of it, every shattered dream, so that the world would remember the price of arrogance. Weeks had passed, and the landscape we traversed had transformed into a realm of ghosts. The forest no longer felt like a place to hide or rest. It was a living, breathing entity that seemed to conspire against us. Every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of a bird made my heart race. But what weighed on me more than the threat of the enemy outside was the empire itself, the distant machinery of power that had abandoned us to our fate. Reports trickled in through messengers who somehow braved the dangerous roads. The empire was in turmoil. The generals who had led us into the trap were under investigation, yet none had been held accountable. Blame shifted from one office to another like a hot coal, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. The bureaucracy that should have saved us had collapsed into indecision, leaving men like me to fight for survival, without orders, without reinforcements, without hope. And yet, the most horrifying truth was this: even as the empire faltered, there were those who sought to exploit its weakness. Governors and ministers, once loyal to the crown,
now whispered of independence, of self-preservation at the cost of the greater whole. Letters captured along our route revealed plots to seize territories, to abandon distant outposts, to ensure that no army would ever again march in the Empire's name. The mistake we had made, the misstep that seemed so small at the time, had triggered a chain reaction that now threatened everything we had once believed untouchable. I called a council with the officers who remained, men whose faces were etched with lines of fear and exhaustion. "Listen," I said, my voice rough and low. "We are no longer part of an empire that protects its own. We are the remnants, the ones who feel the weight of its failures. Every misstep from above, every decision made in arrogance has brought us here. And now it falls to us to survive, and perhaps to bear witness to the end." Some men muttered, their voices trembling with disbelief. "Sir, how can we survive? The Empire has abandoned us. Supplies are gone. We are outnumbered. The enemy is everywhere."
I nodded grimly. I know, but survival is all we have left. We must rely on what we can control, not what we cannot. The Empire's mistakes are not ours, but the consequences are. And if we are to live, we must move forward together. That night, as the men slept fitfully, I found myself walking along the edge of the river that cut through the forest. The water was black under the moonlight, mirroring my own thoughts. I thought of the cities we had left behind, the streets filled with people who believed in the invincibility of our empire. How ironic that they had no idea how quickly it was unraveling. One mistake, one catastrophic misstep, and the machinery of power, the pride of a continent-spanning empire, had begun to crumble like sand slipping through fingers. I wondered how many would live to see the empire's end, how many would return to tell the story. And I realized that the mistake was not just the map, not just the trap, it was the arrogance, the unwillingness to listen to those who saw danger clearly, to question authority even when it mattered most. That arrogance had infected every level of command, every decision, and had finally led to our undoing. The following morning, we were forced to make a perilous choice: cross a mountain pass known for its treacherous terrain, or attempt to skirt it through the forest, where we risked ambush. I chose the forest, relying on instincts honed through days of survival. The decision was risky, but hesitation would have been fatal. Every step was slow, deliberate, and exhausting. Every shadow felt like an enemy, every whisper of wind like a threat. As we trudged forward, I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. The Empire's shadow was long and dark, and its mistakes were heavier than any pack I carried. I realized that the true loss was not only in territory or men, it was in the trust, the unity, the very belief that an empire could endure. One mistake had done more than cost lives. It had shattered faith, the invisible glue that binds an empire together. And in that moment, as the forest closed around us and the enemy remained unseen yet always present, I understood that the fall of an empire is not sudden. It is a slow, painful collapse, measured in fear, betrayal, and the haunting knowledge that survival often comes at the expense of everything you once held sacred.
The forest that had been our refuge now became our prison. Every sound, the snapping of a twig, the rustle of leaves, even the distant call of a bird, felt like an alarm announcing our presence to the enemy. We had been moving cautiously for days, keeping to paths only we could detect,
but I knew the enemy was hunting us relentlessly. Their intelligence was terrifyingly precise, as if someone had handed them every move we intended to make. And perhaps they had. Betrayal, I realized, had become our constant companion. It was the 4th day into a rainstorm when we first encountered them. The enemy forces emerged from the mist like shadows, their silhouettes barely visible against the gray morning. I froze for a moment, heart pounding, then shouted orders with the force of desperation, knowing that hesitation now meant certain death. "Form up, hold the line." The men obeyed, but not with the precision of trained soldiers. They moved with the panic and desperation of men who had seen too much, who had been pushed to the very edge of endurance. I could feel fear in every step, in every shaky grip on a weapon, in the way their eyes darted across the trees searching for threats. Fear was no longer a warning, it was a companion, a living thing that crawled over our shoulders and whispered doubt into our ears. The first shots rang out, sharp and sudden, echoing through the forest. I watched as men fell beside me, some screaming, others silent, their faces frozen in disbelief. I fired my own musket repeatedly, pulling soldiers back when they faltered, dragging the wounded to cover. Every move was a struggle, every breath a battle against the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. I saw one young soldier, barely 17, caught in the open. Without thinking, I ran to him, dodging musket fire and falling debris, and pulled him behind a fallen log. His wide eyes reflected both terror and awe. "Sir, I thought we were done for," he whispered, shivering. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor of his fear. "We're not done yet," I said, though even I wondered if that was true.
The enemy pressed relentlessly. They were better prepared than us, more numerous, and seemed to anticipate our every move. It was a nightmare realized, a vivid proof that one mistake could set into motion events beyond comprehension. Each time we gained ground, it slipped from our grasp. Each time we tried to retreat, the forest seemed to conspire to trap us. Hours passed like days. The rain soaked through our clothes, chilling us to the bone. Hunger gnawed at our bellies, and our muscles screamed with exhaustion. And yet, we fought. Not for glory, not for the empire that had abandoned us, but for the raw, unyielding need to survive. I realized then that survival in the aftermath of a mistake is a different kind of battle, one not fought with strategy or numbers, but with sheer will and stubbornness. By nightfall, we had managed to hold our position, but the cost was devastating. Nearly half of the men who had left our last camp were gone, their bodies claimed by the forest or the enemy. Silence fell over the survivors, broken only by the sound of rain and distant cries. I walked among them, noting every wound, every tear-streaked face. There was no joy in survival, only the grim knowledge that we had barely escaped death once more. I sat alone that night, staring into a small fire, reflecting on the empire that had failed us. One simple mistake, one decision made in pride and arrogance had set off a chain reaction that had brought us here to the edge of annihilation. And yet, in the darkness, I clung to a stubborn hope. If we could survive this, if we could endure the forest, the enemy, and the weight of the Empire's mistakes, then perhaps there was still a chance to witness, to remember, to carry the story forward. I
realized as I watched the fire die down to embers that the true cost of an empire's collapse was not just the loss of land or power. It was the cost to the men who lived to see it, the memories of the fallen etched forever into their minds, and the weight of knowing that history itself had been shaped by a single, catastrophic mistake.
By the time the sun rose the next morning, I understood that survival was no longer a matter of skill or courage alone. It was a matter of making impossible choices. The forest had tested us beyond anything I had imagined. Hunger gnawed at the men relentlessly, their bodies weakened, their minds fraying. The rain had turned the earth into a quagmire, every step a labor, every movement a risk. And the enemy? They were always there, always patient, as if they knew the moment we faltered would be the moment they struck. I gathered the remaining men and examined our options. One route would take us over a mountain pass, steep and treacherous, but it might allow us to escape the enemy's pursuit. The other led deeper into the forest, where we could hide, but risked starvation and ambush. Either choice could be fatal. Either choice might be our last. I looked at the faces of the men I had left. So many had fallen, so many more carried wounds that would never fully heal. Some of the younger soldiers stared at me with the question in their eyes. Could I lead them to safety, or would this be the day we all died? I felt the weight of their trust crush me, the unbearable responsibility of knowing that one wrong decision could end everything. I chose the forest. It was not a decision made from courage, but from pragmatism. The mountain pass, though tempting, was far too exposed, and our strength had been reduced to a fraction of its original size. In the forest, at least, we could use the shadows, the trees, and the knowledge we had gained over weeks of evasion to our advantage. It was a gamble, a desperate hope that stealth could overcome numbers. As we moved, the forest seemed to close in on us. Branches tore at our clothes, roots threatened to trip us, and every sound made the men flinch. I could hear whispered prayers, muttered curses, and the occasional sob of someone too exhausted to hide their fear. I understood then that survival was more than physical. It was a test of spirit, and ours were fraying at the edges. Then we found them. A small clearing, seemingly abandoned, became our temporary refuge. I instructed the men to rest, to eat what little remained of our meager rations, and to tend to their wounds. I walked the perimeter, constantly alert, knowing that the enemy could strike at any moment. And in that silence, I made a horrifying realization. Even if we survived the forest, even if we evaded the enemy, the empire that had sent us here would never protect us. It had abandoned us entirely. Night fell, bringing with it a dense fog that blanketed the forest. Shadows shifted unnaturally in the mist, and the cries of animals made every rustle feel like the approach of death. I stayed awake, alert, listening to the breathing of my men, calculating our chances, weighing every possible outcome. The responsibility was suffocating. The mistake, the map, the trap, the arrogance of those in power had brought us here, and now I had to make decisions they had refused to consider. Hours passed, and finally I knew what had to be done. At dawn, we would split the remaining forces into 2 groups, moving along separate routes to increase our chances of survival. It was a calculated risk. Splitting would weaken us, but staying together guaranteed detection and annihilation. I spoke to the men, their eyes reflecting fear and resignation. "I know this is dangerous," I told them, "but we have no choice. We must trust one another, even as we walk different paths. Survival depends on it." Some nodded silently. Others stared wide-eyed, as if the weight of the decision had physically struck them. I did not expect courage, only compliance, and even that was enough. That night, I slept fitfully, haunted by visions of what could go wrong. I dreamed of men lost in the fog, of screams echoing through the forest, of the empire crumbling beyond any hope of redemption. When dawn broke, the mist hung thick and suffocating, and I gave the order. 2 groups moved silently through the forest, each man carrying the burden of fear and hope alike. My own heart pounded as we vanished into the shadows, uncertain if we would meet again, uncertain if any of us would survive. And in that moment, I understood fully the truth I had been running from since the first misstep. One single mistake, one decision made in arrogance or haste had set all of this in motion. Every life lost, every battle fought, every step through the forest was a consequence of that moment. And the empire, once so confident, now existed only in memory, its shadow haunting us in every tree, every rustle, every whispered breath of wind.
We had been moving through the forest for hours, the mist clinging to our skin like a cold hand, when I realized something chilling. The enemy had been waiting for us. Not in the open, not in the obvious clearings, but in the shadows, in places we had assumed were safe. It was as if the forest itself had been turned against us, guiding their movements, hiding their presence until the perfect moment. And now, that moment had arrived. It started with a single shout, piercing the fog. One of the younger soldiers had stumbled into an ambush. The crack of a musket rang out, followed by screams that shredded the silence. Panic erupted instantly. Men scattered in every direction, the ones who had been following my instructions now abandoning discipline in favor of sheer survival instinct. I ran toward the sound, pulling my musket from its sling, shouting for anyone who would listen to hold the line. The enemy was unlike any force I had ever faced. They were organized, ruthless, and prepared. Not only did they know the terrain better than we did, they anticipated our every move. Each volley of musket fire seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Arrows flew from unseen archers, striking men before they even realized the threat. I could feel the weight of their precision, the inevitability of their strategy, and I realized that we were fighting not just men, but the consequences of our own empire's arrogance, the very miscalculation that had led us into this trap. I shouted orders, dragged wounded soldiers to cover, and fired whenever I had the chance. The forest echoed with chaos, the cries of the dying blending with the sounds of the rain-soaked earth. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of how close we were to total annihilation. Every choice mattered now, every hesitation a potential death sentence. Through the fog, I spotted a small clearing where we might make a stand. I gathered what remained of my unit and formed a defensive line behind fallen trees and jagged rocks. We were exhausted, starving, and terrified, but there was still a spark of defiance. Survival had become a primal instinct, stronger than fear itself. I could see it in their eyes, the determination to live, to endure, even in the face of impossible odds.
The enemy pressed forward relentlessly. I fought alongside the men, dragging one wounded soldier behind me while firing at another attacker. It was a dance of death, brutal and exhausting with no end in sight. And yet, amidst the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. I realized that the single mistake that had doomed our empire, the decision to trust the map, to ignore warnings, to act with arrogance, had brought us here. But it had also forced us to confront the raw truth of survival. Hours passed in a blur of violence, each second stretching into eternity. By the time the fog began to lift, the battlefield had been reduced to silence, broken only by the occasional groan of the wounded. Our numbers were decimated, the enemy finally retreating into the shadows as mysteriously as they had appeared. We were alive, yes, but at what cost? Nearly half of the men I had marched with just weeks ago were gone, their bodies claimed by both the enemy and the unforgiving forest. I stood among the survivors, breathing heavily, soaked to the bone, and realized something that chilled me more than the rain. We had won only by sheer luck, by force of will, and by exploiting every weakness in the enemy's strategy. The empire, which had promised safety, strength, and inevitability, had failed us utterly. And yet here we were, scarred, battered, and alive. But survival was no victory. It was a reminder that one single mistake could unravel everything, that pride and arrogance could destroy empires, and that those who lived to tell the tale carried the weight of history on their shoulders. That night, I walked through the fog alone, listening to the faint whispers of the forest. I thought about the empire we had served, the men we had lost, and the mistakes that had led us here. One choice, one moment of pride had set this chain of events in motion. One decision cost lives, ruined careers, and changed the course of history. And I understood in that cold, wet silence that the consequences of a single mistake were far greater than any man could ever imagine.
The forest grew silent in a way that was almost unnatural after the battle. The screams had faded, leaving only the sound of dripping rain and the occasional rustle of leaves. I walked among the survivors, counting heads, noting wounds, and feeling the weight of every life that had been lost. Nearly 2/3 of the men who had set out on this journey were gone, fallen to ambush, disease, exhaustion, or the relentless cruelty of nature. I could not mourn them properly. Survival demanded constant movement, constant vigilance. Grief had no place here. We moved slowly, carrying what supplies we could salvage, using the shadows of the trees for cover. Hunger had become our constant companion. Rations were gone, water was scarce, and every step was a struggle against the terrain and our own bodies. Yet we pressed on, driven by the stubborn instinct to survive, to see another sunrise, to escape the consequences of the empire's arrogance, even if only a few of us remained. As we trudged forward, I reflected on the empire we had served. It was no longer an abstract concept or distant authority. It was a ghost that haunted every decision we made. The arrogance of those in power, the single misstep that had led us into a trap, and the subsequent indecision at the top had left us stranded, vulnerable, and exposed. We were living proof that empires are not eternal,
that pride can be fatal, and that a single mistake can ripple across continents and generations. The men spoke less now, their voices hollow, their energy sapped by weeks of suffering. When one soldier fell, there was no scream, only the quiet acceptance of a man who knew death was inevitable. I had become a leader not by choice, but by necessity, forced to make impossible decisions and bear the consequences of each one. Every action I took felt like a balance on a knife's edge, every moment a struggle between life and death.
We emerged from the forest into a valley that looked almost peaceful compared to the chaos we had endured. The sight of an abandoned village gave us hope. Houses were empty, roads silent, but it was shelter nonetheless. I led the men through cautiously, checking for signs of the enemy or other threats. Inside the village, we found food caches left behind by fleeing villagers, stale bread, a few preserved meats, water that was questionable but drinkable. The relief on the men's faces was brief, tempered by exhaustion and the knowledge that this respite might be temporary. That night, around a meager fire, I spoke to the remaining soldiers. "We have survived what no man should survive," I said, my voice echoing in the cold air. "The empire that sent us here failed us, but we are still alive, and as long as we live, we carry the truth of what happened. We carry the memory of those who fell, and perhaps one day the world will understand that one mistake can cost everything." Some of the men nodded silently. Others stared into the fire, lost in thought. I knew they were haunted, not just by what they had endured, but by the knowledge that our survival was a direct result of the Empire's failure. We were living contradictions, victorious in life, yet defeated in spirit. We had escaped the battlefield, but the war, the true war of power, pride, and consequence, was far from over. I spent the rest of the night walking the perimeter, thinking about the future. Even if we survived, even if we reached safety, the Empire was crumbling. Orders would no longer reach distant outposts. Territories would be lost. Soldiers who had not faced the disaster we endured would die believing in a strength that no longer existed. And I understood with a sinking certainty that history would remember us not as heroes, but as victims of one catastrophic mistake. By dawn, we were ready to move again. The forest behind us, the valley before us, and the unknown stretching beyond. I knew the journey was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a faint sense of purpose. We had survived the consequences of a single mistake, and in that survival, there was a story to tell, a story of arrogance, betrayal, and the fragile nature of empires, one that the world would not forget. By the time we finally emerged from the forest, the world beyond had changed in ways I could scarcely comprehend. Reports reached us, fragmented, inconsistent, sometimes unbelievable, that the empire we had served so proudly was unraveling at every level. Cities once secure now teetered on the edge of chaos. Governors and generals blamed one another. Borders were contested, alliances shattered. The machinery of power that had seemed invincible now creaked and groaned, held together only by the fading memory of authority. We were survivors, yes, but at what cost? Most of the men who had marched with me were gone. Families lost, friends gone forever, soldiers whose courage had been worn down by betrayal, hunger, and battle. I carried their faces with me, etched into my mind like permanent shadows, each one a reminder of how fragile human endeavor can be, how easily arrogance can destroy the strongest of foundations. I walked through a deserted town, the remnants of what had once been a bustling community. Shops looted, streets empty, flags torn and dirty. It was a ghost of civilization, a mirror of the empire itself, once proud, now fractured and abandoned by its own architects. I realized then that empires are not toppled solely by enemies or external forces. They crumble from within, destroyed by pride, miscalculation, and mistakes that are dismissed until it is too late. And that single mistake, the one map, the one ignored warning, the one moment of arrogance had set the course for everything that followed. Every death, every hardship, every betrayal could be traced back to that one decision. An empire, I understood, is only as strong as its leader's judgment. One lapse, one moment of hubris, and the whole edifice begins to collapse like a house of cards. I gathered the remaining men one final time. We were fewer than 20 now, ragged, hollow-eyed, but alive. I looked at each of them and spoke, my voice heavy with grief and revelation. We have survived what was never meant to be survived. The empire that sent us here has fallen in ways few will ever understand. And we who lived, who witnessed, who endured, carry the story. A story of pride, of arrogance, and of the consequences of a single mistake. Remember it, tell it. Never let history forget what happens when one decision is made without thought, without caution, without humility.
For a moment, there was silence. Then one of the men nodded slowly. Another whispered in agreement. I could see it in their eyes, the weight of understanding, the realization that survival was not victory, that endurance came with the burden of memory. We were the living testament to failure, the witnesses of a collapse born from arrogance. As we moved onward toward what remained of civilization, I reflected on the lesson that would haunt me forever. Power is seductive, pride is blinding, and one mistake, a single seemingly insignificant error, can unravel everything, bringing low what seemed unassailable. We had seen it, we had endured it, and now we were the keepers of its story. I often think about the empire, the cities, the soldiers who did not survive, and I realize that history is not just written by victories and triumphs, it is written by mistakes, by the moments when human error intersects with ambition. That one mistake, the choice to trust arrogance over caution, had changed the course of nations, and it had changed the lives of every man who walked with me through that forest. I survived, and with survival comes responsibility, to remember, to witness, to tell the tale. Because the empire may be gone, but the lesson endures. One mistake is all it takes. One mistake, and everything you know, everything you trust, everything you fight for can vanish in an instant. And I will never forget it.